But welcome to Dow's Weekly Digest. Over in Iowa, they are giving students credit for going out to the public and mowing lawns and shoveling snow in the wintertime. So kind of like a community project, and they're going to give them those kids credit for it. And I think that's a good idea. So what's new? I think that's pretty darn cool. Another thing I came across was this phrase, and I thought, well, maybe I'll throw that out. A lot of people might want to use that. Help them with the protection of their financial face mask. They're used to that phrase, face mask, right? Keep it in mind. Keep it in mind. Well, one of my recollections, I have recollections now and then with this old gray hair. 3 years ago, folks, I was able to take a group, LaDonna and I, to Panama. This group was from our church, and we did kind of a short-term mission project down there. Now, coming back, that's kind of where the recollection started a little bit. Coming back, we had to go through Houston. So that's where I kind of tied the recollection of that Hurricane Harvey with Hurricane Laura as it went through the good old US of A. Phrase this week, folks, will be this phrase here. Be the best, or another way to say it maybe is being the best, with an emphasis on innovation. Innovation. But first, let me admit that, as I'm doing Dow's Weekly Digest, and with this old gray hair, I bring along some biases, folks. I'm partial to peach pie over apple pie. So I have my biases, as I've gone through life's journey, I kind of bring my own luggage, you might say, my own baggage. But you know what? That's what makes Dow Dow. And that's what makes you, you. So yeah, I just want you to know I've got some biases there. As you can tell me, I like horses. I like Shel Silverstein, the poet. So you'll have to bear with me on my biases, if you will. Now that we got that out of the way, and before we explore the phrase of the day, let's look at a little cowboy wisdom. You're never going to break a horse if you still stay sitting on the fence. I was fortunate enough that I was able to, with my family, particularly my grandpa, I bought a yearling quarter horse. And of course, it's one of those where he says, you're going to have to break it. You're going to have to train it. And you're going to have to work with it. And when I say work with it, he said, you're going to have to work with it, work with it, work with it, and work with it. It isn't something that you can just do once a week. You're going to have to work with that young yearling once a day, every day, for as long as you can do that day. And if you do, then you're going to reap the rewards. But you're not going to do it by what? Sitting on the fence. And are you willing to do that? And I said, yep, Grandpa Dad, I am. I said, well, let's go get you a yearling. You might be a Lutheran. You might be a Lutheran if you notice that the stock for Kool-Aid goes up during the VBS season. That the stock for Kool-Aid just rises and rises in the summertime when the VBS season comes. And oh my goodness, orange Kool-Aid, red Kool-Aid, let's put it together. Oh, a lot of Kool-Aid. So let's fill them up with sugar and then hold our VBS, folks. But good old Kool-Aid. Brings us to South Dakota trivia. It happened during the month of August. The year was 1990. The lady's name was Sue Hendrickson from Hill City, South Dakota. Well, her and her staff was continually and committed to make a discovery. Her and her staff in 1990 found a fossil of a T-Rex. They found 90% of that fossil. one of the largest finds ever. It was over here by Faith, South Dakota, around the Badlands, right here. You know, folks, as they uncovered that, number one, there was kind of a controversy on who owned the fossil itself. And then later, they sold it. Now, I said it was one of the largest. If you just go up to the hip of that Rex, that was 12 feet. It was 42 foot long. Well, it was later sold $8.3 million, folks, of some bones from Badlands here in South Dakota. South Dakota trivia. The phrase again was what? Be the best or being the best, and applying innovation. Well, what does the Bible say about that? Well, let's look at 2 Timothy 2:15, and then we'll also look maybe at 1 Corinthians 9:24-25. And this is the ESV version, folks. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. So do your best. How about that? 1 Corinthians 9. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Be the best. Well, it has been said that, an example is better, 10 times better, than just good old verbal advice. There was a firm that was going to hire someone to their company. And to hire the person, they kind of had a problem-solving part of their hiring. They gave each applicant a stone. They gave them some twine. And they gave them a stopwatch. One of them was a scientist, one of them was an engineer, and the other was an economist. The scientist, she took the rock, and she then took the rope, and then she then took the stopwatch. And what their problem was, folks, there was a building. And they said, here's the 3 things that you have. Tell us how tall that building is. So she took all 3 of the items and went to the top of the roof. She ties the stone around the twine, lowers it all the way down to the ground. And then she starts to do a pendulum. And after so many repetitions, then she started to time it. Scientist comes down and says, this building is 200 feet and 11 inches. Well, the engineer takes the twine, throws it away. He goes to the top of the building, and with the stopwatch, and he knows the law of gravity, he drops the stone and times it and comes back. He says, this building is 201 feet and 6 inches. Now the economist, he takes the rope, throws that away. He takes the stone, he throws that away. He goes into the building, and then he comes out and he says, it's exactly 200 feet. And he said, you're right. How did you know that? We didn't see you up there. He said, well, I just went downstairs, found the janitor, and says, hey, I'll trade you this stopwatch for letting me look at the blueprint. And that's how he got 200 feet. Which one did they hire, folks? The one that applied the innovation, being the best at the time that it called for. My next example here, folks, in fact, the following examples are all true stories. This one deals with, well, I guess each one of them does with maybe the 4 C's. One, each person kind of knew the goal that they were going for. And then they applied confidence, clarity, connect with the people to what? Get her done. And all that together made what? Commitment. You see, to them, what? You hear the phrase, well, seeing is believing. I think each one of these examples shows that they, what? Believing is seeing. Let me ask you a question. When's the last time you saw your brain? Do you have a brain? How do you know you have a brain? You haven't seen it, have you? Most of you haven't. But yet, you're all telling me that you have a brain. So, believing is seeing. So let me introduce you to Mat Stutzman. Mat Stutzman is from Fairfield, Iowa. Now, Fairfield is over by Cedar Rapids, so in the eastern part of Iowa there. Like very shortly after he was born, Mat was adopted. And he was adopted by a very loving family. And they let him know all the time that Mat was growing up that he was special. But you know what? They didn't treat Mat any way different than the other 6 children that they had in the family. You see, Mat was born with no arms. But as I said, they didn't treat him any different. Now, when he was first born, they tried some apparatuses and things, but after that, they just didn't. They thought, Mat, you're going to be out in the world, and you're going to have to, use innovation and adapt. He belonged to a family that loved to hunt. They loved to archery hunt. He wanted to go along, more than just ride in the truck. He wanted to go in the hunt, get up on the stand, all those things. So he started to use his innovation and devised a shoulder strap that he could then use. He used a regular compound bow, and you know what? He used his legs. And he practiced and practiced and practiced, and pretty soon he was able to go hunting. And he was able to then adapt himself, be able to go up on the stand. He was able to drive a car. The car was not adapted any other way than normally. Where we would use our arms and fingers, he used his legs and his toes. He got so good at that archery that he started entering tournaments. And he didn't compete in a special area. He competed with able-bodied competitors, and he started to win. Well, after a while, folks, he got a sponsorship, Realtree, and he started as an occupation then. Well, one day, a friend came up to him and says, you know what, Mat? You're only sponsored because you don't have any arms. That's why they hired you, is because that's what made you different. You're different, and that's why they hired you. You're not that good, otherwise they wouldn't hire you at all. That lit a fire under Mat, and a commitment, folks. And so he practiced and practiced and practiced. And not in, of course, the one Olympics that canceled, but the one before that, Mat received a silver medal in the Olympics. Mat also holds the world record. Now just think of this, folks. How long is a football field? About 100 yards, right? Mat drew that bow, and he went 310 yards and hit that target. A world record over 3 football fields. My goodness, folks. He's so eyes probably can't even see 3 football fields, let alone try to hit the target. Mat Stutzman, again, he is showing what? Be the best, or being the best, in his commitment. The next gentleman I'd like to tell you about, folks, again, remember these are true stories. His name is Bob Wieland. Justin, my son, and myself, we had the opportunity to meet Bob and hear Bob in 1992. Now, a little background on Bob. Exceptional athlete. He received an offer from the Philadelphia Phillies. However, that very same week, he received a letter that maybe some of you got. I got one of those. Greetings and salutations. The U.S. government would like you to show up for a physical. Because we all had, back then, called a lottery number. Well, Bob said he was going to join the U.S. Army. And his choices would be a cook or a medic. Bob signed up to be a medic. And he served over during the conflict in the Vietnam War. And one of the days that they were out on patrol, they thought they were going to ambush the enemy, but it was just reverse. And Bob was hearing help, help, help all over the place. And he goes to help a fellow comrade, and as he's going, he steps on a mine, he says. And in doing so, he says, my legs went one way and my life went another. One of the first letters that Bob wrote to his folks was, I want you to know that I'm okay. I want you to know that everything's going to be okay. They're treating me real fine. P.S. I think I lost my legs. One of the things they did with Bob, of course, was start him on rehab. He said they started him on 5 pounds. He thought, well, that's nothing. He could barely lift 5 pounds. You see, folks, he was 6 months in intensive care. But the weights got a little bigger and bigger and bigger. And in fact, they thought maybe it was in jest, but he wasn't. He says, I'm going to break a record on weightlifting. So Bob trained. He trained to be a weightlifter. And the weightlifters were in Venice, California. So that's where he went. He set the bench press world record. But during that meet there, the officials come over and says, I'm sorry, Bob. It's not going to be official. Mind telling me why? He says, yeah, back here on page 2, it says that anyone who doesn't wear shoes has to be disqualified. Bob said, just so happened he didn't wear his shoes that day. So they disqualified Bob. You know, folks, he said, that's okay. It was just the journey. Bob set the record 3 more times, folks. Finally, they had to come and say, we just have to disqualify you from competing. Because you're setting the record, but we can't count the record. That didn't, make him under what we'd call depressed or anything. Bob just went on. In fact, he went on, folks, to be the strength coach and the conditioning coach for the Green Bay Packers. After that, it seemed to be, after all that, Bob still wanted to take on challenges. And he heard of a gentleman named Fox up in Canada that only had one leg and was going across Canada. He was a veteran also, and he had passed away. Bob made a commitment that he was going to do that only across America. On his haunches, if you want to call it that, using his upper body to go across America. In fact, folks, here's a picture of Bob Wieland as he was going across the United States. It took Bob Wieland 3 years to go across the United States. He said he started in California and there was quite a group that went with him. It was summertime and they got into Arizona, and all of a sudden, man, a lot of them says, we're going to turn back to California. He says, looked around, he was the only one. He gets to Texas and one person starts to run with him. And he goes all the way across the United States with Bob Wieland. So Bob wasn't going to turn back. Bob was what? Committed. He was committed for doing the best. What an example of commitment, folks. Final example is this. This person was also, when he was born, was very early adopted, just like Stu. And he joined this loving family, but in doing so, it became a mixed family. But they instantly told him that he was special. You are special, and no doubt you're different, but you are special. Younger age, under the age of 5, he almost died of scarlet fever. And as he was growing up, it seemed like he was always the shortest one in his class. But in his early years of being raised in his schooling, it was almost like he was in a bubble like maybe the UN. You see, there were Asian Americans, there were Black Americans, there was Latino Americans, there were Korean Americans, there was German Americans, there was, as you can imagine, all kinds of Americans. What a melting pot that he was able to grow up in. One of the things that he loved was that of baseball. And he was told he couldn't join the baseball league because of the color of his skin, which was quite a blow to him. Now all this went into his bag. He went to college and he applied himself. And when he got out of college, he would go to company, and it didn't seem like anyone was hiring. Then all of a sudden, one company says, "We're looking for someone of your type." You see, there was a thing called affirmative action. Well, later, as he would go and be with peers and be at meetings, he would hear, "You know why they hired him? They hired him because of the color of his skin. That's the only reason they hired him." That lit a fire of commitment to that person, much like Bob and Stu. So he worked, and he moved up the ladder, so to speak. Went to bigger offices, more responsibilities. In 1987, this company has to be as different benchmarks, probably number 4 in the industry. This company, number 4 in the industry, they have over 11,000 employees. They were celebrating one of their anniversaries, and in doing so, they come to recognize that you get things done through people. You get things done through people. And they wanted to recognize the people. So this wasn't a sales contest, to speak, and a lot of companies have sales contests, including them, but this was not the case. They had this program here, and they called it Be the Best. And so they asked for nominations, but they had very, very strict criteria on the nominations, and if they weren't followed, they were disqualified. And asking these nominations for those nominations to be called, recommended by their peers, by the whole company, of Be the Best. And of the 11,000 employees, they only chose three employees. 2 from their home office, and then 1 from what they would call then the field itself. So that young man, in being in 5 different offices, was totally amazed of all the nominations that he received from his fellow workers, both his internal and external customers. And you see, in 1987, then, they then awarded them the Be the Best. Besides the recognition themselves, they also then awarded for them to go to the 1988 Winter Olympics in Canada. And the very next year, they would go to the Super Bowl for being nominated and showing the attributes of maybe those 4 C's that I talked about and being called Be the Best. I was able to share some of the details of that story, for you see, folks, the he is me. In 1987 and going in 1988, then LaDonna and I were fortunate enough to go to those Winter Olympics and be then what? Acknowledged by all those peers, including some of those whispers, that the company and the peers were recognizing me as being one of the best. Commitment, folks. It takes commitment. Well, hey, let me share with you a carrier that, in their sense of commitment and consistency, they are being one of the best, folks. One of the best. And that is Protective Life. they, again, in their innovation, folks, they'll look at such things as the permanent plans that they have. How if you apply a stress test and maybe there has to be a change or there needs to be a change due to outside environments of the premium, they're able to then work with that, folks, itself. They have an ability to look at maybe the term insurance, but they have a kind of a hybrid, a term UL, where they're able to do 1035 exchanges. Innovation, folks, innovation. Let me bring a couple of examples here for you. First, quick example here, folks, on life insurance basics. What type of life insurance is best for you? So it goes over the basics with the client on what is best for the client, depending on what's the need and the wants of the clients. It starts off some maybe springboard questions that you can ask the client. So be sure to ask your internal wholesaler on this particular piece right here. This one is entitled, Protecting Your Family While Paying a Mortgage. How many of us out there are using the L word, leverage, to what? To purchase that home by way of what? Mortgage. Is there a risk there in that mortgage if the breadwinner died yesterday? I think there might be. Protecting your family while paying that mortgage. Please ask your internal wholesaler for information on this one here. Basic question here, folks. Is it time to consider life insurance? And maybe one of the standard answers is, well, I've got life insurance at work. Oh yeah, now, you just changed jobs, right? Do you know how much insurance you have now with the new job? How much did you have before? Seems like it could change, right? Maybe it's time to consider life insurance that you have, and you have the flexibility and control over. Then through that life's journey, maybe the question can be, is it time for permanent life insurance? And then they even are able to expand maybe that word permanent life insurance into different types. It gives you the opportunity to cover that with your client. So some valuable resources here. Contact your internal wholesaler for samples of those. The phrase is what? Being the best. Be the best. And my recommendations, kind of in that category, folks. First, let's look at the poem. The poem is entitled Be the Best by Doug McCullough. Doug McCullough, Be the Best. The book, folks, is an oldie but good. In fact, in some of my early days, I used this and considered this gentleman kind of as a mentor, if you will. It's In the Search of Excellence by Tom Peters. He goes to different businesses and he says, you know, what makes them work? How are they able to put the peoples and the systems together and do excellence time and time again. Such as you always hear of what Apple or Disney, some of these are smaller companies, folks, that he looks at, but still they are being the best every single day. How about the song? The song was in 1988. You'd hear it around Olympic time, particularly when we won gold. That was the year that they had Eddie the Eagle from England. He was a ski jumper. Wasn't very good, but and then I think the Jamaican bobsledders were there. So those were some of the maybe highlights I quickly remember during that week that we were there. It was called Simply the Best by Tina Turner. 1988, Simply the Best by Tina Turner. Good song, good song. And how about movies? Well, I'm not going to recommend Rocky. I'm not going to recommend Rudy or Coach Carter. You know, honorable mention, yes. But the one I want to mention is probably, maybe you haven't seen and everything. Excellent stars. It's got Denzel Washington, okay, as one of them, and Forrest Whitaker. It's called The Great Debaters. The Great Debaters. And you know what? I like them. It's a true story, folks. Excellent movie there. My power phrase comes from our friend Ben Feldman, folks. The biggest asset that you have in your earning capacity. So the biggest asset that you have You want to do that balance sheet. On your earning capacity depends entirely on your attitude. Entirely on your attitude. Ben Feldman. Now the video, guess what? Of course it comes from Protective Life. I enjoyed it. I think you will too.
My dad taught me...
My dad.
Lessons I learned from my dad. Wow.
My dad taught me how to ride a bike.
How to tie my tie perfectly.
Well, my dad taught me to negotiate where you can negotiate.
He's like, it takes the same amount of time to do it poorly as it does to do it well. So do it well from the beginning.
He always says look them straight in the eye.
Every time he looks at me and says so, I know a lesson's coming.
He always said to keep it simple. He always said that.
I learned from him that there weren't any man jobs around the house.
Then he taught me to get one bunny ear, wrap it around the other.
Que siempre respetara a mi madre.
They said, "You know how to sew on a button?" Of course I know how to sew on a button. My dad taught me.
I wanted to make sure that when he wasn't around anymore, I was gonna be okay.
My dad was a rock my entire life. I mean, always consistent with me, always there, and just this model of how to be a man.
He's really strong for an old man. My dad makes me feel safe.
So here's the thing, I have my own son now. And I want to make sure that he's always going to be okay. I want to make sure he's always going to be taken care of. That's what dads do. That's what dads do.
Some words I picked out of that, folks, was this. Consistent. I heard someone say the word consistent. Do it well. Do it well or don't do it at all. Look them in the eye. Look them in the eye. So those are some things I picked up in that short little video. I thought it was a good one. God's plan for you. Almost spilled the beans right there. God's plan for you. And blessed are they who ease the pain of misfortune, for they shall be called insurance agents. You take care.